My name is Aubrey. Standing in the midst of the silent, stunned crowd at my father's 60th birthday party, I watched as the empire built on deception crumbled before my eyes. Karen, my stepmother, her face drained of color, stared at my father in disbelief, her hand tightening around the champagne glass that now seemed like an anchor pulling her down. Shannon, her daughter, with a once golden confidence now shattered, stood there, eyes wide with panic. It all started years ago, when I was just a young girl growing up in a grand mansion in Seattle. My father, Henry Thompson, was a successful businessman who had built his real estate empire from the ground up. In his world, appearances were everything. The opulent house, the lavish dinners, and the perfect smiles were all part of the facade he presented to the world. My mother, a gentle and kind woman, passed away when I was 12. The house that once smelled like her favorite lavender became filled with the overpowering scent of Karen's perfume shortly after. She moved in within a matter of months, a woman who seemed to have mastered the art of turning cruelty into charm. Every word that came out of her mouth was like a double-edged sword, often hiding an insult beneath the guise of a compliment. Shannon, Karen's daughter, was my father's new favorite. At the dinner table, I would count the number of times he said Shannon's name. If he remembered to say mine, it was like a small victory, proof that I still existed in this family. I was always on the fringes of family photos, wearing a half smile, feeling more like an outsider than a daughter. The only thing that made me feel alive was my camera. At 16, I used the money I earned from tutoring younger kids in the neighborhood to buy my first camera. Back then, it wasn't about photography as an art form, it was a way to survive. Through the lens, I could frame the world on my own terms, capturing the details that others missed. A homeless man huddled in an alley, a child's innocent laughter in a park, these were the truths that no one really wanted to see but were real nonetheless. When I turned 18, I left home. No one tried to stop me. Karen threw a polite farewell lunch, acting as if I was just a passing guest. My father signed a check and told me to call if I needed anything. I never did. Years went by, and I built a career filming the stories of others. I documented farmers losing their land to big corporations, veterans struggling to readjust to civilian life, and single mothers working multiple jobs to raise their children. These were real stories, filled with real pain. But every time I turned off the camera, the silence would come back, whispering that I had never faced my own demons. Then, one cold winter day, I received an email. You're invited to Henry Thompson's 60th birthday celebration. Formal attire. There was no warm greeting, no signature, just that simple message. I sat in front of my computer screen, staring at it for a solid minute. Most people might have deleted it, but I couldn't. After a lifetime of being ignored, this invitation felt like a sign that I still mattered. As the party date approached, I found it harder and harder to sleep. My small apartment in Seattle seemed to shrink with each passing night, filled with half-packed camera gear and the constant hum of my charging camera. I lied to myself, saying I was only going to film some extra footage for a new project. Deep down, I knew I was going to uncover the truth. That's when my friend Lily showed up. She was always a bit of a mess, with her unruly hair and a sketchbook tucked under her arm, the smell of paint following her like a shadow. You won't believe what I heard, she said, dropping onto my couch. I was so used to tuning out the world that I didn't look up at first, but there was an edge in her voice that made me stop what I was doing. Shannon was at the coffee shop downtown, she said. She was talking to some guy, Jake, I think. She said Dad won't have a clue once the papers are signed. My heart sank. What papers could she be talking about? Lily shrugged. It sounded like business stuff, but I saw her laptop screen. It had your dad's company logo on it. That night, we stayed up late, digging through old files. Lily remembered a shared cloud drive she had used with Shannon for a design project years ago. The password was still the same. Inside that cloud folder, we found scanned contracts, emails, and a draft transfer form. Shannon and Karen had planned to transfer my father's company shares into Shannon's name, using Jake as their silent partner. The messages were filled with a sense of entitlement. "Dad will be grateful later," Shannon had written. "Aubrey will never say a word. She never does." Reading those words was like a punch in the gut. It wasn't just about greed, it was a confirmation of every unspoken rule I had lived by in that family. Karen always got what she wanted, Shannon was the star, and I was the invisible one. Lily looked at me seriously. "You could expose them with this," she said. I nodded, but the words caught in my throat. I could already picture my father's face if I told him the truth. Confusion, humiliation, maybe even heartbreak. For a brief moment, I hated myself for still caring about him. I copied all the files onto a small USB drive. The sound of it clicking shut was like the cocking of a gun. I held it in my hand until it burned, knowing that this was my truth, my weapon, and my way to finally be seen. When Lily left that night, she squeezed my shoulder and asked, "So, what are you going to do?" I looked out at the city lights, blurred through the window. "I'm going home," I said quietly. But this time, I'm not the same Aubrey they used to know. On the morning of the party, Seattle was wrapped in a gray mist, making everything look like a distant memory. I packed my stuff carefully, putting my camera equipment in first, followed by the USB drive. I chose a long black dress that felt more like armor than clothing. The silence in my apartment pressed down on me, heavy with anticipation. "It's time to tell my own story," I whispered to myself as I closed the suitcase. The drive to the estate was like traveling back in time. The long driveway lined with tall evergreen trees, the old iron gate that creaked as it opened, it all felt so familiar, yet different. The place that once seemed so grand now looked smaller, as if it had lost its hold on me. I parked the car under the big oak tree where I used to wait for my father's approval, which never really came. The cold wind carried the faint smell of fir trees and the faint scent of money. Inside, the house was glittering with lights. There were long strings of fairy lights, white tablecloths, and the sound of champagne glasses clinking. Karen's voice could be heard from across the room, warm and fake, designed to draw attention. She was wearing a diamond necklace that probably wasn't hers and a smile that seemed to say she owned the world. Shannon walked behind her in a sparkly blue dress, every step perfectly choreographed. When I walked into the room, Karen's eyes flickered over me, as if I was an unexpected mistake. "Aubrey," she said, her voice sweet but with an edge. "You actually came." I forced a smile. "You invited me." "I guess we did," she murmured. "Try not to cause any trouble tonight." Her words were like ice on my skin, but I didn't flinch. I had been through this before. My father appeared a short while later, looking dapper in his black suit. "Aubrey," he said, sounding a bit surprised but also cautious. "Good to see you." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied. He gave me a polite smile and then moved on to talk to other guests. That small moment of dismissal, hidden behind a smile, was the spark that ignited the fire inside me. I sat through the speeches, the toasts, and Karen's fake display of being the perfect wife. But every time I saw her touch my father's arm, or heard Shannon's overly loud laughter, I could feel the USB drive in my clutch getting heavier. When the dancing started and people were distracted, I slipped away down the hallway towards my father's office. The old portraits on the wall seemed to watch me as I opened the door and placed the USB drive next to his nameplate. For the first time in a long time, my hands were steady. A few minutes later, my father found me standing there, by his desk. The sound of laughter from the party echoed faintly down the hall. When he saw me, he stopped in the doorway, one hand still on the frame. "Aubrey," he said softly, as if my name was too fragile to say. "Karen said you'd gone outside. You shouldn't be in here." "I know," I said calmly. "I just needed some quiet." He hesitated for a moment and then walked in. The lamp on his desk cast a warm light on his face, highlighting the lines that I used to trace with my fingers when I was little. He looked older, and his expression was still hard to read. You look like your mother, he said quietly. She used to stand in this office, looking like she was searching for something she'd never find. I let his words hang in the air. I wanted to tell him that what she was looking for was his love and attention, but I didn't. Instead, I slid the USB drive across the desk towards him. He frowned. What's this? The truth, I said. You deserve to know it before it's too late. His expression changed, first to confusion, then to irritation. He was a man used to being in control, and this was unexpected. What are you talking about? He asked. Just watch, I replied. He sat down, muttering something under his breath, and plugged the drive into his laptop. The screen flickered to life, showing a video that Lily and I had put together. Karen's voice filled the room, calm and confident. Once the transfer goes through, Henry won't notice a thing until it's all done. Then Shannon's laugh. He'll probably thank us. Dad loves to think he's in charge. And Jake's voice, asking if they were sure no one else had access to the files. Karen replied smoothly, only us. Aubrey is too busy with her little camera projects to know anything about the business. I didn't look at my father. I watched his reaction in the reflection of his glasses. I saw the moment when recognition dawned on him, when his mouth slightly opened in shock. The illusion that he had lived in for all these years was shattered. When the video ended, the only sound in the room was the soft jazz music seeping through the walls. He sat very still for a long time, then whispered, "My God." I took a deep breath. You always said the truth was important, that integrity mattered. But you never bothered to see what was happening in our own family. His hand trembled a little as it rested on the mouse. You could have made a big scene tonight, he said in a low voice. Why didn't you? Because I don't want to destroy you, I said. I just want you to see me, to see the real me. He looked up at me then, really looked. It was like we were both learning a new language at that moment. Slowly, hesitantly, he reached across the desk and placed his hand on mine. It was a simple gesture, a bit clumsy, but it was the first real connection we had in years. I see you now, he said. And something inside me that had been coiled up for so long began to unwind, not in pain, but in relief. We stood there in silence for a while, the air thick with all the things we had never said. Then, quietly, he closed the laptop, picked up the USB drive, and said, "Stay here." I followed him a few steps behind as he walked out of the office and into the main hall. The music stopped abruptly when he appeared. Everyone's eyes turned to him. "Karen," he said, his voice calm but firm. She turned around, smiling automatically. "Darling, is everything okay?" "Not yet," he replied. She blinked, and her smile faded. "What's wrong?" He held up the USB drive. "You tell me." For a moment, confusion crossed her face, then fear. Her grip on the champagne glass tightened. "Henry, what does this mean?" "I watched the video," he said. "Every word." Shannon's face froze, and her confident expression cracked. "Dad," she started to say, but he cut her off. "Don't." His voice, though not loud, carried across the room, and everyone fell silent. "You've both betrayed my trust," he said. "You treated it like a commodity you could trade." Karen tried to speak again, her voice turning syrupy. "Henry, please. She's trying to make trouble." He pointed at me, standing at the edge of the crowd. "She's my daughter, and she saved this family from destruction." The silence that followed was deafening. Karen's face lost all color, and Shannon's eyes filled with panic, not guilt. Then, my father reached into his pocket and took out 2 envelopes, placing them on the table beside the untouched birthday cake. "One is for the divorce," he said. "The other is your dismissal from the company. You both need to leave." Karen's voice broke for the first time. "You're choosing her over us?" He shook his head. "I'm choosing the truth, and I'm choosing honesty." I stood there, not moving, not gloating. I just watched as their false world crumbled. The guests shifted uncomfortably, not knowing whether to stay or leave. Karen's eyes met mine, full of desperation and anger, but this time, they couldn't make me feel small. My father turned towards me. "Aubrey, let's go," he said, his voice strong. We walked out of the house into the cold night air. It felt like a cleansing, a new beginning. We walked across the gravel driveway, his steps slow and mine steady. For once, he didn't try to fill the silence. Halfway to the car, he said softly, "I used to think protecting you from pain was the right thing to do. I was wrong. I was just avoiding the truth." I didn't say anything. There was nothing more that needed to be said. We drove away from the estate, never looking back. Behind us, the lights of the mansion faded into the distance, a false dream disappearing into the night. For the first time in years, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Justice hadn't roared that night, it had whispered, walking beside me hand in hand with peace. 3 months later, I went to see my father. The mansion had been sold quietly, without any big announcements. There was just an empty driveway and a for sale sign swaying in the wind. He had rented a small cabin by a beautiful lake, far away from the noise of the city. When I arrived, he was sitting on the porch, a cup of coffee in his hand, wearing an old, faded sweater instead of a suit. "You found it," he said with a smile. I followed the silence, I replied, and it made him laugh softly. We didn't talk about Karen or Shannon. We didn't need to. The silence between us had changed. It was no longer filled with fear and misunderstanding, it was filled with peace. He made another cup of coffee for me, and we sat there, watching the sunlight dance on the lake. The man who once measured his success by the size of his business now seemed content to watch the ducks swim by. A few weeks after that, he called me to tell me he had watched my latest documentary, about women who had been silenced for years but finally found their voices. "It was hard to watch," he admitted. "But I'm so proud of you. You had the courage I didn't." That night, I stood on my balcony, looking at the city lights, and I felt a sense of freedom. The coldness that had followed me for so long was finally melting away. Now, I continue to film stories of women like me, stories of quiet revolutions. My first screening sold out a small theater downtown. When the credits rolled, and people stood up to clap, I saw my father in the back row, quietly wiping away a tear. For years, I chased after a love that demanded I be silent. But now I know better. Real love listens, even when the truth is painful. I used to think that revenge had to be loud and violent, but standing there after the screening, seeing people connect over these stories, I realized it could be gentle, like a soft light that pierces the darkness. As I pack my camera bag for my next trip, I look at the old USB drive sitting on my shelf. It's no longer a weapon, it's a reminder. The truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to be told. Before I turn off the lights, my phone buzzes with a message from my dad. "Proud of you, kid. Keep shining bright." I smile, put the phone in my pocket, and whisper to the quiet room, "Never again will I hide." Because that's the real victory, isn't it? It's not about tearing down someone else's world, it's about finding your own voice and refusing to be silenced.